In the 1960s, a psychologist named Stanley Milgram wanted to understand obedience. He was particularly interested in the psychological mechanisms that lead people to follow orders, even when those orders conflict with their personal morals and ethics. This curiosity was not just academic, it had real-world implications that were deeply rooted in the events of the time. He wanted to know why people follow orders, even when those orders might be wrong. What makes a person set aside their own judgment and defer to an authority figure? Is it fear, respect, or something more complex? These were the questions that Milgram sought to answer through his groundbreaking research. Milgram designed a study that became very famous but also very controversial. The setup was simple yet ingenious. Participants were told they were part of a learning experiment where they would administer electric shocks to another person whenever an incorrect answer was given. What they didn't know was that the shocks were fake and the person receiving them was an actor. Milgram's experiment aimed to see how far ordinary people would go in obeying an authority figure. The authority figure, dressed in a lab coat, would instruct the participant to increase the shock level with each wrong answer. The real focus of the study was to observe how the participants reacted to these instructions. He wanted to know if they would follow orders, even if it meant harming another person. The participants were often visibly distressed, sweating, trembling, and even protesting, but many continued to administer the shocks when urged by the authority figure. This raised profound ethical questions about the limits of obedience and personal responsibility. This question was especially important after World War II, when many people were trying to understand the Holocaust. The atrocities committed during this period were fresh in the public's mind, and there was a desperate need to comprehend how ordinary people could participate in such horrific acts. The Holocaust was a terrible time when Nazi soldiers killed millions of people. The world was grappling with the enormity of these crimes and the moral implications for humanity. How could so many people be complicit in such evil? This was not just a historical question, but a deeply psychological one. Many people wondered how the soldiers could do such horrible things. Were they inherently evil, or were they simply following orders from their superiors? This dilemma was at the heart of Milgram's study. He wanted to explore the extent to which authority could influence an individual's actions, even to the point of committing atrocities. Was it because they were evil people, or were they just following orders? Milgram's study provided a framework to explore these questions scientifically. By creating a controlled environment where participants believed they were causing harm, he could observe their behavior and draw conclusions about the nature of obedience. Milgram's study tried to answer this question. His findings were both shocking and enlightening, revealing that a significant number of people would follow orders to the point of inflicting pain on others simply because an authority figure told them to. This has had lasting implications for our understanding of human behavior, ethics, and the power dynamics in society. Milgram's experiment involved 3 people: the experimenter, the teacher, and the learner. This setup was meticulously designed to explore the depths of human obedience and authority. The roles were clearly defined, each with a specific purpose to serve in the grand scheme of the experiment. The experimenter, often dressed in a lab coat to symbolize authority and scientific legitimacy, was in charge of the study. This person was the figure of authority, the one who would give instructions and ensure that the procedure was followed to the letter. The presence of the lab coat was not incidental. It was a deliberate choice to reinforce the experimenter's authority. The teacher was a volunteer who didn't know what the study was really about. They were led to believe that they were participating in a study on memory and learning. This volunteer was the unsuspecting subject of the experiment, the one whose reactions and decisions were being closely observed. The teacher's role was crucial because it was their behavior under the experimenter's instructions that Milgram was interested in. The learner, on the other hand, was an actor pretending to be another volunteer. This person was in on the experiment and knew exactly what was going on. Their role was to simulate the experience of receiving electric shocks, to react in ways that would elicit a response from the teacher. The learner's performance was key to creating the illusion that the shocks were real. The teacher and the learner were in different rooms, separated by a wall. This physical separation was important because it prevented the teacher from seeing the learner. Adding to the realism of the situation, the teacher could only hear the learner's responses, which were carefully scripted to simulate pain and distress. The teacher couldn't see the learner, but could hear him through a speaker. This auditory connection was designed to make the teacher believe that the learner was genuinely experiencing pain. The sounds of discomfort and pleas for the shocks to stop were all part of the act, intended to test the teacher's willingness to continue administering shocks under the experimenter's orders. The teacher's job was to give the learner a memory test. This involved reading a series of word pairs to the learner and then testing their ability to recall the pairs correctly. If the learner made a mistake, the teacher was instructed to administer an electric shock as a form of punishment. The shocks were supposed to increase in intensity with each subsequent mistake. If the learner got an answer wrong, the teacher had to give him an electric shock. The shock generator had switches labeled with increasing voltage levels from mild to severe. The teacher was told to move to the next higher voltage for each wrong answer. This incremental increase was designed to test the limits of the teacher's obedience. Of course, the shocks were not real. The shock generator was a prop, and the learner was never actually harmed. The entire setup was a carefully constructed illusion to create a believable scenario for the teacher. The real focus of the experiment was on the teacher's reactions and decisions. The learner was not actually being hurt. They were acting following a script that included vocalizing pain and distress at specific voltage levels. This performance was crucial to convincing the teacher that the shocks were real and that their actions were causing genuine suffering. But the teacher believed the shocks were real. This belief was essential for the experiment to work. The teacher's perception of reality was manipulated to see how far they would go in obeying the experimenter's orders, even when it meant inflicting pain on another person. This was a very important part of the experiment. Milgram wanted to understand the power of authority and how it could compel ordinary people to commit acts they would normally find reprehensible. The experiment sought to reveal the extent to which people would follow orders, even when those orders conflicted with their personal morals and ethics. Milgram wanted to see if people would obey orders even if they thought they were causing someone else pain. The results of the experiment were shocking and revealed unsettling truths about human nature and the influence of authority. Many participants continued to administer shocks, despite hearing the learner's cries of pain, simply because they were told to do so by the experimenter. This experiment has since become a cornerstone in the study of social psychology, illustrating the powerful impact of authority on human behavior. The teacher was given a sample shock before the experiment started. This shock was real and painful. It made the teacher believe that the shocks they were giving the learner were also real. The shock generator had different levels, starting from 15 volts and going up to 450 volts. Each time the learner made a mistake, the teacher had to increase the voltage of the shock. As the voltage increased, the learner started to cry out in pain. He even begged the teacher to stop. The teacher could hear everything the learner was saying. This made the teacher feel very uncomfortable. Many teachers started to hesitate and question whether they should continue, but the experimenter was there, watching them and telling them to keep going. Section 4. The power of authority, following orders. The experimenter wore a lab coat and spoke with authority. This simple attire and demeanor were enough to establish a sense of legitimacy and power. The lab coat, a symbol of scientific knowledge and expertise, played a crucial role in how participants perceived the experimenter. It wasn't just about the words he used, but the entire persona he embodied. The participants saw him as a figure of authority, someone who knew what he was doing and had the right to direct their actions. He told the teacher that it was important to continue the experiment. The emphasis on the importance of the experiment added another layer of pressure. Participants were made to feel that their actions were contributing to a greater good, a significant scientific endeavor. This sense of purpose made it even harder for them to refuse the experimenter's commands. They were not just following orders, they were part of something bigger, something that mattered. He said things like, "The experiment requires that you continue and you have no other choice. You must go on." These statements were not just instructions, they were commands that left little room for doubt or hesitation. The language used was clear and unequivocal, designed to eliminate any possibility of refusal. The participants were put in a position where disobedience felt like a violation of a fundamental rule. The experimenters' presence and instructions had a powerful effect on the teachers. The authority figure's demeanor, combined with the structured environment of the lab, created a setting where obedience was the expected behavior. The participants were ordinary people not used to defying authority, especially in a formal setting. The stress and conflict they felt were palpable, but the authority figure's influence was stronger. Even though they felt uncomfortable and didn't want to hurt the learner, most of them continued to obey the experimenter's orders. The internal struggle was evident in their expressions and actions. They were torn between their moral compass and the perceived obligation to follow orders. This conflict highlighted the immense power of authority in shaping human behavior. The participants' reluctance was clear, but the authority figure's commands overrode their personal judgments. They felt like they had to do what the authority figure was telling them to do. This sense of obligation was not just about the immediate situation, but also about broader societal norms. From a young age, people are taught to respect and obey authority figures, whether they are parents, teachers, or other figures of power. This ingrained behavior made it even more challenging for the participants to resist the experimenter's commands. This shows how powerful authority can be. The experiment demonstrated that authority could compel individuals to act against their own ethical beliefs. It wasn't just about the specific context of the experiment, but about the broader implications for understanding human behavior. The findings were a stark reminder of the potential for authority to be misused, leading people to commit acts they would otherwise find reprehensible. When someone in a position of power tells us to do something, we are more likely to obey, even if it goes against our own morals or values. This tendency has been observed in various contexts, from the military to corporate environments. The Milgram experiment provided a controlled setting to study this phenomenon, but its implications are far-reaching. It challenges us to think about the ways in which authority influences our actions and the importance of questioning commands that conflict with our ethical standards. Section 5. Shocking results. Obedience and distress. The results of Milgram's experiment were shocking. Over 65% of the participants, the teachers, continued to give shocks up to the highest level of 450 volts. This was even though the learner was screaming in pain and begging them to stop. The study also showed that the participants experienced a lot of stress and emotional conflict. They knew it was wrong to hurt another person, but they felt unable to disobey the experimenter. Many of them were visibly upset, sweating, trembling, and even experiencing nervous laughter. The findings of Milgram's study were highly disturbing. They showed that ordinary people are capable of inflicting pain on others when ordered to do so by an authority figure.